On tonight's summary of the Israel-Hamas War, day 167. As hostage negotiations continue, another summit meeting of the negotiators has been called. The directors of the CIA and the Mossad, as well as the Egyptian intelligence minister, are all traveling to Qatar on Friday. The IDF operation in Al-Shifa hospital continues. Arrests of senior Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives have been reported. The U.S. Secretary of State explicitly states that an IDF invasion of Rafah will be a mistake. Israel says it is going to continue alone if it has to. The United Kingdom threatens weapons embargo on Israel if the country does not allow the Red Cross to visit the Nukhba fighters who are in Israeli prisons. Israel reportedly holding secret negotiations with the Fatah movement about future plans to govern the Gaza Strip, contrary to the government's official public policy. Hello everyone, I am Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute fellow at the University of California, Irvine. Here bringing you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War. It's currently the evening of March 21st, 2024 in the United States, the morning of March 22nd, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, another summit meeting has been called between the chief negotiators of the different parties. The heads of the Mossad, Dedi Barnea, CIA Director William Barnes, and Egyptian Head of Intelligence Abbas Kamel are all going to travel to Qatar on Friday in order to meet the Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed Thani. The high-profile meeting between the four usually indicates that there's progress in negotiations. Meanwhile, this has been denied by the negotiating teams on both sides, saying that no breakthrough has been achieved and just incremental advancements have possibly been made. However, it is important to note that it was a meeting between the four that produced the first truce and hostage deal back in November, and it was also a meeting between the four that produced the second Paris summit agreements that then laid the groundwork for these negotiations. So even though it is being denied, it is likely a sign that there is some progress being made, or that maybe a breakthrough will be achieved as a result of their specific summit. Amidst this, Arab diplomats today stated that one of the points of disagreements that have come up in the negotiations is the mechanism for distributing aid in the Gaza Strip during the time of the truce. Hamas is insisting that UNRWA is the only body capable of distributing aid effectively, and that the vast increase in aid that is expected to come through into the Gaza Strip during the truce has to only go through UNRWA. Israel is rejecting this, saying that UNRWA cooperates with Hamas, and that most of the aid will end up in Hamas's hands, and that is why they are demanding that it all go through UNRWA. In addition to this, it was again reported today that the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is continuing to apply pressure on different Arab countries during his visit to Egypt after his visit to Saudi Arabia, stating that they should all in turn apply monumental pressure on Hamas in order to accept a hostage deal. Most of the focus of this pressure, according to CNN, is directed towards Qatar, who has reportedly been asked to expel the Hamas leadership from the country if that leadership does not agree to a deal. According to reports almost a month ago, Qatar did give this ultimatum to the Hamas leadership. This was denied both by Hamas and by Qatar. However, it is this pressure is being applied by the United States, and it is possible that at least behind the scenes there is this pressure being applied on the Hamas leadership, stating that they will be expelled from the country if they don't come to a deal. However, it is not being publicly stated. Moving on to the Gaza Strip, there were no rockets or mortars that were reportedly fired from the Gaza Strip towards Israel in the last 24 hours. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, the IDF operation in Al-Shifa hospital continues. This is now day 4 of this operation in this compound. The IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari stated today that this is the largest concentration of terror operatives that have been arrested since the war began in the Gaza Strip, adding that over 140 terror operatives have been killed in this operation thus far, and over 550 operatives have been arrested, 338 of them reportedly active Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad fighters. During the operation and the fighting, Al-Qassam brigades reported targeting 3 IDF tanks with Yasin 105 missiles, as well as an armored troop carrier in the area. The group also released a video showing a sniper of the Al-Qassam brigades targeting IDF troops in the hospital compound. Meanwhile, the IDF reported taking over the Qatari structure of the Al-Shifa hospital, and substantial gun battles developing with operatives that were hiding in the basement floor. There are also reports of operatives within the emergency ward that are currently trying to carry out gun battles with the IDF. The IDF is reportedly coordinating evacuating the 220 patients and medical staff from the emergency ward to other areas of the hospital in order to continue taking over the area. Among those who were arrested are some senior operatives of both Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. From the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, some of the notable figures are Muhammad Jandia. He's the commander of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad Sajaiya Battalion and deputy of the entire northern division of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad's fighting forces. Samir Ziad Abed Abu Uda. He's the commander of the rocket launching operations in the Palestinian Islamic Jihad's Al-Shati refugee camp brigades. And Ahmed Samara, he's the person in charge of tunnel operations for the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the entire northern Gaza Strip. From the Hamas side, in addition to Mahmoud Kawasme, whom you can hear about in my report yesterday, he was arrested, today was reported that Omar Atzira, who is in charge of Hamas's operation in the Nablus region of the West Bank, Hamdallah Ali, who is in charge of Hamas's operation in Kilkilia in the West Bank, and Hassem Salameh, who is responsible for Hamas's intelligence and lookout posts in the entire Gaza division, were all arrested in Al-Shifa hospital. In addition, IDF spokesperson Hagari stated that some very senior Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives were also arrested, but their identity is not yet being exposed until after their interrogation. I remind everyone that I reported yesterday that Palestinian sources stated that Hateb al-Batash, who is one of the most senior figures of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, was arrested in Al-Shifa hospital. The IDF has not commented on this yet. Likely he's on the list of who Hagari is referring to as some of the most senior officials. Hagari added that interrogations have shown that the large amount of Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas operatives convened in the compound, as they expected that the IDF would issue warnings prior to invading the hospital, as it did last time in November, and they did not expect an invasion would occur during Ramadan. Reportedly, the entire hospital compound was surrounded with 2 rings of IDF armored divisions and units within 21 minutes of launching the operation, and that is one of the reasons that most of the operatives did not manage to escape. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, in Han Yunis, fighting continues in different regions of the city, with a particularly intensive activity reported in Hamed City in the western parts. The IDF reportedly raided over 100 structures in the past 24 hours in this area, with substantial gun battles reported with different Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives. In addition, Hamas sources stated that a car was attacked by missiles in the Bani Suheila region, this is the eastern parts of Han Yunis, and that several people were killed in this attack. The IDF did not report who the target was. Commonly, when missiles are fired at cars, this usually indicates some sort of targeted assassination. Likely we'll find out more about this in the coming days. Other news related to the Gaza Strip is specifically related to the possible invasion of Rafah. Israel's Minister Ron Dermer, who is one of Prime Minister Netanyahu's closest confidants and part of Israel's mission that is going to go next week to the United States to discuss the Rafah invasion, echoed Netanyahu's statements and again stated today that the invasion of Rafah, quote, will happen even if Israel must fight alone. Even if the whole world, including the United States, turns its back on Israel, we're going to fight until we win. So he's echoing Netanyahu's statements that no matter what happens, what the Biden administration tells Israel, Israel intends to invade Rafah. Hours later, the United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken used the most explicit language with regards to the U.S. understanding regarding the Rafah invasion, and stated in a press conference while he was in Egypt, and I quote, "A large military operation by Israel in Rafah will be a mistake and is unnecessary. It is a false decision. You have to deal with the Hamas threat, but this does not require a major military operation in Rafah." So up until now, the United States has been voicing its general objections to this operation. This is the first time that it is explicitly stated that as far as the U.S. is concerned, this will be a mistake, and not only that, explicitly saying it's not necessary undermines a lot of what Israel is saying, that Hamas cannot be defeated without such an invasion. Regarding casualties, no IDF soldiers reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, leaving the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began on 251. There was no report made explicitly about the number of IDF soldiers who were injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. However, the injured list of IDF soldiers since the invasion began has been updated. It is now 1,489. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 65 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 31,988. 74,188 Palestinians are reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, there are continuous paradropping aid missions in the Gaza Strip, some of these specifically in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, in the last 24 hours. Planes participating in the paradroppings today included planes from Jordan, Egypt, the United States, Germany, and Singapore. Singapore yesterday joined the countries that were conducting these missions. Other news, in Al-Shifa Hospital, Hamas's Ministry of Communication reported that 13 patients died in the last 24 hours as a result of equipment failure and the conditions that were created in the hospital due to the ongoing fighting. Importantly, I will add that this did not come through the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip, which is the ministry that is in charge of actually documenting Palestinians who die in hospitals. And the message also did not state the usual information that is given regarding such deaths. However, this was put out by the Palestinian Communications Ministry, and this ministry was the one that when the Palestinian Health Ministry stopped functioning for about a week or two in November and December, it took over reporting how many deaths occurred, so I am reporting it. However, I will say did not come through the usual channels. In addition to this, Saudi Arabia's King Salman Humanitarian Aid and Relief Center pledged $40 million today that are going to be donated to UNRWA, stating this is going to specifically go for housing purposes and bringing more food into the Gaza Strip. Moving on to the West Bank, there was a lot of activity in the West Bank in the last 24 hours. A Palestinian attack occurred near the Efrat settlement. An object was thrown at a passing bus and exploded. It is being investigated if this was a Molotov cocktail or an explosive device. No casualties were reported. Regarding IDF activity, in Aqaba Jabir refugee camp, this is areas near Jericho, the IDF and the Shabak conducted a covert operation to arrest a Palestinian who intelligence indicated was planning on carrying out a suicide attack in the imminent future. The forces reportedly advanced in the house in secret and were fired upon when they tried to carry out the arrest. The suspect was in fact arrested. 3 Palestinians were killed in the surrounding gun battles. In addition, in the operation in Nur Sham's refugee camp in Tulkarem that I reported about that was beginning when I started my report yesterday, the IDF stated that 3 Palestinians were arrested and 4 Palestinians were killed, 2 in the aerial attack that started the invasion and 2 in gun battles with the IDF. In addition to this, confrontations also erupted in the Al Bira region near Ramallah during the IDF activity. 1 Palestinian was reported killed in the confrontations and 2 were injured. In addition to this, Muhammad Hawashin, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad commander of the Jenin region, who was injured in the IDF assassination yesterday, where 3 other Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives were killed in Jenin, died today of the wounds that he sustained in that assassination. In addition to all this, the IDF reported that it is opening an investigation into an incident that happened in the West Bank today, when a Palestinian who previously has an interesting story, he had actually converted to Judaism, his name is Samah Zaytun, or his Hebrew name is David ben Avraham, was shot and killed by an IDF reserve soldier. According to the soldiers on site, he was being searched and a knife was found in his bag. The circumstances in which he was then shot and killed are reportedly being investigated. In addition to this, after I reported yesterday of violence between armed factions and the Palestinian Authority in Jenin after the assassination that the IDF carried out, it was reported today that Karim Jabarin, a 19-year-old Palestinian as part of the Jenin division, that is the local armed divisions, executed his twin brother, Karim Jabarin, on suspicion of collaborating with Israel. According to reports, he was accused of supplying the information that led to the assassination that the IDF carried out yesterday, and after confessing his crimes, he was executed by his brother. Other news, the Palestinian Prisoners Authority reported today that 14 of the Palestinians released in the hostage deal in November have since been arrested again, the majority of these in the West Bank. Reportedly, the Hamas negotiating team has been instructed to raise this point in negotiations and ensure that any Palestinian prisoners who are released in a future deal are not arrested again. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon, there were continued barrages of rockets and missiles from Lebanon targeting the northern parts of Israel in the last 24 hours. Rockets targeted the areas of Ramon Naftali, Metula, Shlomi, Mate Asher, Avivim. There were also mortars and anti-tank missiles that were fired toward the areas of Dovev. Reportedly, one of the missiles did not explode and was detonated later by the police. 2 missiles were also fired towards Kiryat Shmona. Other rockets were also launched towards areas of Kfar Giladi, Mayan Baruch, Kfar Yuval, Tel Chai, Beit Hillel, and Goshrim. Regarding IDF activity in southern Lebanon, the IDF reported a helicopter attack against a Hezbollah unit in the Tir Haifar region. In addition, warplanes reportedly attacked Hezbollah terror infrastructures in the areas of Yarun, Yarin, and Ita Sha'ab, and 3 Hezbollah structures were also targeted in the areas of Misal Jabal and the Hula village. Attacks were also reported in the areas of Adahira. El Manar, which is a Hezbollah affiliate, reported IDF attacks in the areas of El Hiyam, Itaron, and El Adaisa. In addition to this, Al Akhbar reported today that 2 Lebanese people have been arrested in Lebanon on suspicion of spying for Israel. Specifically, their arrest was in relation to the assassination of Salah al-Aruri from a few months ago. According to the report, the 2 supplied information about streets, apartments, vehicles in the area, and served as lookouts around the apartments in the area that Salah al-Aruri was assassinated. The report adds that the two worked for a company that was in contact with Israel. However, they themselves did not know that they were supplying information to the IDF. Reportedly, prior to their arrest, Hezbollah forces were deploying en masse in the Dahya region in southern Lebanon, checking everyone's identity as they passed by until these two were found and arrested. Moving on to some of the regional developments, explosions were heard today in the areas of Eilat, that is the most southern town in Israel. A little later, the IDF reported that it intercepted an aerial target that was making its way towards Israel from the Red Sea region. The target reportedly did not cross into Israeli airspace and was intercepted. Other news, the Houthis announced today that Chinese and Russian ships will be given safe passage through the Red Sea. It was not made explicit if this includes if such ships are affiliated with Israel or making their way to Israel. Initially, the Houthis were targeting only Israeli ships. Then they expanded this to any ship that's affiliated with Israel or making its way to Israel. Then they expanded this to virtually any other ship. Now they've given quote-unquote safe passage to Chinese and Russian ships. It remains to be seen how that's actually played out. Regarding violent activity, earlier in the day, the British nautical security company Ombre reported that a commercial ship signaled that it was being fired upon from the sky near the Nishton port in Yemen. No casualties were reported, and the ship reportedly continued on course. In addition to this, the U.S. Central Command reported that a coalition attack destroyed a Houthi drone today, and that the U.S. attacked an uncrewed sea vessel as well. Later in the day, it was reported that a drone and 2 nautical missiles fired by the Houthis were also intercepted by the United States. In addition to all this, in a speech given today, the Houthi leader, Abdelmalek al-Houthi, stated that since October, the movement has launched 479 missiles and drones, quote, in support of Palestine. So theoretically, this is all the missiles and drones that the group has launched since the war began in October. Moving on to the political and general trends, the Israeli War Cabinet is due to meet tomorrow before the arrival of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Israel. He's reportedly coming for a few hours. Blinken reportedly requested to meet with the War Cabinet on this trip. After last trip, he had requested such a meeting, but Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu canceled the meeting of the War Cabinet and the meeting with Blinken hours before it was planned. Other news, NBC and CNN both reported today that the United States is bringing forth to the UN Security Council a resolution calling for hostage release and immediate long-term ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. The language of the resolution is reportedly the harshest language that the U.S. has used with regards to a ceasefire thus far. However, the ceasefire in the resolution is still tied to a hostage release, different than previous UN Security Council resolutions that the U.S. has vetoed that only called for a ceasefire regardless of release of hostages. It is expected that Russia is going to veto this resolution because it is tied to the hostage release. However, in terms of the escalating rhetoric of the United States with regards to the war, this is a substantial step forward with regards to criticizing the way Israel is handling the war, bringing forth a resolution of the Security Council saying that if theoretically it was accepted, that the United States is agreeing that a ceasefire needs to be imposed on the region. Other news, the EU Foreign Minister, Joseph Borrell, who had been stated in the last several days that Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war in Gaza, stated today that Israel has the right to defend itself but not to take revenge, adding that the EU is going to try to promote a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Other political news, in a Wall Street Journal interview today, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer stated that he debated for a long time about his speech in which he called for new elections and essentially removing Netanyahu as Prime Minister of Israel. However, that he decided that it was the right thing to do for the sake of Israel itself. He stated that Israel will not be able to survive if it becomes a pariah state, highlighting the declining support for Israel in the world and specifically the consistent declining support for Israel in the United States as well, as shown in different polls, primarily in the younger generation. According to the report, the message that he wanted to convey in his speech was, and I quote, "It's okay to love Israel even if you disagree with Netanyahu and his government." Other news, it was reported today that the United Kingdom demanded that Israel allow the Red Cross and different diplomats to visit the Hamas Nukhba fighters that are being held in Israeli prisons. The Nukhba fighters are the commando units of Hamas that largely orchestrated October 7th. That the United Kingdom also added an ultimatum saying that the UK may stop its weapons exports to Israel if this is not done. This is a very unusual threat for the United Kingdom, and it comes amidst the concerns in Israel of a domino effect after the weapons export embargo that Canada imposed on Israel just a few days ago. Israel has refused to allow the Red Cross or any other aid agencies to visit the Nukhba fighters or even to supply lists of those who were arrested, citing up until now security considerations. It remains to be seen how it will stand up to the ultimatum of the United Kingdom. Moving on to the future of the Gaza Strip, in a press conference given today in Egypt, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken stated, and I quote, "We've seen some initial important reforms in the Palestinian Authority, and more are needed. If the Palestinian Authority continues down this path, the region will support it. In his meeting with the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the two reportedly also discussed paving the way for a future independent Palestinian state. So what the United States is signaling is that they are seeing the Palestinian Authority actually carrying out the reforms that the United States is demanding, however also adding it is just the initial steps. Other important news regarding the future of the Gaza Strip, this time in the way Israel is possibly trying to start to develop how it wants to see the future. A report was published today in the Wall Street Journal and then echoed elsewhere, stating that Israel is in contact with different Palestinian elements in order to place people in charge of managing the aid that enters the Gaza Strip as part of a long-term plan in cooperation with Jordan and Egypt that will gradually hand over administration of civilian matters in the Gaza Strip to these Palestinians. So in other words, Israel is hoping to groom some sort of local leadership, at first just to distribute aid and possibly to build trust between the sides, but later on in order to actually take responsibility for governing the Gaza Strip. Later in the day, it was reported that Israel's Channel 13, that in recent weeks there have been secret meetings between two Israeli officials, one of them being the IDF coordinator of activities in Palestinian territories, and the other being a senior Shabak official, with a prominent figure from the Fatah movement. So it's important to note that Fatah is a big rival of Hamas within the Palestinian larger national movement, and also it's important to note that Fatah has the most prominent movement in the PLO and the Palestinian Authority. And at the same time, that the IDF coordinator of activities in the Palestinian territories and the Shabak are both very, very critical figures when it comes to managing the Palestinian territories. According to reports, the aim of the meeting was to begin to develop a plan for Fatah to take over management of the Gaza Strip in the future. This meeting, which stands in sharp contrast to Prime Minister Netanyahu's public policy with regarding what's going to be the future of the Gaza Strip, has been kept secret thus far. Channel 13 reportedly asked the Prime Minister's office for a response, asking if the Prime Minister had authorized these meetings or not. At least until I recorded this, it's been several hours. The Prime Minister's office gave no response. So what we're seeing is, while officially Israel has not developed a day after plan, and most of what it has said about a day after plan in the Gaza Strip stands in sharp contrast to the United States, in fact, possibly some meetings are starting to happen regarding some sort of local Palestinian leadership that may take over the Gaza Strip later on. However, it remains to be seen how this becomes public and what this will do to Netanyahu's government. If you enjoy these reports, please do remember to give them a like, subscribe, if you turn on notifications if you want to know when reports come out. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.